I record. Welcome back to the Other Side Lifestyle Podcast with Jim and Aram. Today we have some milk drinking, vegetable eating freak trying to kill himself out there eating these deadly ingredients. He's all about defense chemicals. He wants to put them in his body to improve his own self-defense. We have the legendary Alan Aragon on. Was that the best intro you've ever had?
You know what? It was up there, man. It was like top three for sure. I really appreciate you guys having me on. Thank you, Jim and Aram. It's always an honor to be recognized by the top dudes in the industry. So it's really cool to be here.
Don't say top. We're very middle tier and we know it, and we're fine with it.
Dude, I've seen you in person. Trust me, man. You are like a freaking phenomenon / juggernaut. Like people don't even realize what they're dealing with here. So don't even, man.
We're trying, man. You should have seen us at the Silverback Summit over the weekend. I was hobbling around in my peg leg with my Achilles tear.
Oh shoot. Oh God, that's right. You got that injury. So you're down here with the humans now for a little bit.
It's okay.
We're gonna enjoy while we're holding you down a little bit. We're gonna get our egos back up.
Yeah, we decided to post a recap of the event, and it was just clips of Aram hobbling around. No clips of anybody speaking.
So I appreciate that too, man.
We lost him for a second. You back on? Okay, good.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
You're there.
This connection. Okay, so I'm back.
Okay.
I missed what was said.
That wasn't important. Right. It was basically just Jim made a recap video of the event that we were at over the weekend, which is actually a great event talking about male hormone optimization. There's a bunch of doctors there. But the highlight reel was basically just me coming up and down the stairs and then me sleeping with my hands in my pants for about 20 minutes. And that was the main
him trying to move the peg leg.
That's key, man. That's key.
So Alan wrote a book called The Flexible Dieting. I've recommended it, I think, to every single client I have. If not, it's on my book list that I hand out to everybody. I do consider this thing to be like the layperson eating manual.
We don't eat lay people. It's an eating manual for the layperson.
Right.
Yeah, we don't want to confuse anyone.
I'll categorize and I'll explain what a layperson is. And I would consider a layperson anybody that doesn't have a formal education in nutrition and or fitness. So anybody outside of that, to me, when it comes to what we talk about, as a layperson. So first of all, what started you on the track of, like, you've been in this field for a while doing research and everything else. What led you to decide to write this book, and why as simplistically as you did? Because Lord knows you have a plethora of knowledge that you could have been super nerdy about, but you decided to distill it down for your average person, which I respect. But talk about that.
Yeah, dude. I wrote a book in 2007 called Girth Control, which I mean, I don't know how I thought of that title, but I did. And I don't know how I got the nerve to title the book Girth Control, but I did. And it was a self-published book. And it's pretty interesting story. The person who encouraged me to write a book back then in 2006, it was 2005, 2006, was a guy named Lyle McDonald.
We know Lyle McDonald.
I don't know if much of your audience does, but he just kind of resides in the dark, seedy corners of the internet.
you saw the page he has where people can go to the page and talk shit about him on the page.
Yeah, Lyle's a meanie or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. The guy, he knows that he's so hated that he has a page to enhance the hate.
Yeah. Lyle is a unique individual. Very, very, very interesting guy. But he encouraged me to write a book. He's all, you need to write a book. You don't want to keep that knowledge all just locked in your brain. You should write a book. And so I wrote Girth Control, and this was in 2007. And what flexible dieting is, what it honestly is, it is a 15-year update of Girth Control. And Girth Control was just basically how to alter body composition, how to gain muscle, how to lose fat. And there's some athletic performance elements in there as well. And with with the new book, Flexible Dieting, I just tried to cover as much of the non-clinical nutrition topics that I was personally interested in, and the topics that I thought were important for fitness professionals in all the allied fields, from the exercise guys to the nutrition guys, that I felt were important for them to have a working knowledge of. So what happened when did I write Flexible Dieting? Is it like almost a couple years now or something like that?
Was it 17 or 18? Or was it?
Oh
No, it was
boy,
later than night. No, it was right around COVID, I think.
Yeah, I think it's 2 years old now, maybe.
First published in 2022 by Victory
Shit.
Belt Publishing.
Really?
Okay,
so
was that 2022.
Wow.
Alan Aragon.
So less than 2 years. Yeah, so I started working on it like 2-3-ish years back, and the reason why I actually wrote this 15-year update of 2007's girth control is because, and this is kind of a funny story because it's not heroic or anything like that. It goes like this. Brett Contreras gave me a call and said, "Hey, Alan, I have some friends at Victory Belt Publishing who want you to write the book on flexible dieting. And if you don't write it, then that sucks, because then one of your many students in the space is gonna
colleagues, quote.
Right. One of your many colleagues and students in the space is basically going to just try to relay the stuff that you've pioneered and you've brought to the space, and that would be a tragedy." And so I'm like, yeah, you're right. That would be a tragedy. So, all right, I'll do it. And anyways, Brett wasn't going to take no for an answer. And anyway, he was selling me on the idea. It's like, "Alan, this is a big publishing company. This is a chance for you to have an artifact for a legacy. You got to do this. Like, there's no saying no to something like this." I'm like, okay, Brett. So I'm like, I'm going to take this opportunity to just write what I would consider to be the definitive, evidence-based, non-clinical nutrition book. I mean, clinical nutrition is a whole other world, like therapeutic interventions for various disease states, renal nutrition, and this nutrition, gut nutrition, all that stuff. I'm much more interested in how do we gain muscle, how do we lose fat, how do we perform better, and those areas have just universes within them to spend whole careers on. And so I leave the clinical nutrition to the clinical nutritionists, the dietitians, the doctors, the medical nutrition therapists. Yeah,
most people want that stuff anyway. Your average person, we talk about this constantly. If you ask Mr. and Mrs. Jones if they cared about their back squat or their 40 time or their box jump height or anything like that, they don't care about that stuff. They just want to look good and feel better in and out of clothes. They want to be able to finally get off the dieting cycle. They want to stop having to use fads. They want to stop having to believe in potions and powders. So with something like as practical as the flexible dieting model, I think what you did was you really did a service to our space by taking something that a bunch of these coaches are just arguing about daily that we don't need to hear because it's just confusing people more, and distilling it down to a very practical, applicable, usable, essentially manual that folks can get through and be like, cool, now I kind of have some confidence in navigating the space.
Right. Yep. That was the intention, man. And I'm glad you see it that way. I'm glad that you have the book, Jim. That is like, that means you're dead serious about this stuff.
Yeah. And I reckon anytime somebody ever asks me, obviously since after it's been written, like, do you have a book if they want to learn stuff about nutrition, I recommend that book as well. Because again, with the clinical stuff, everything's so niched down. It's so specific. And this is the problem with the supplement industry. Studies show. It's like,
my two least favorite words.
Yeah, it's like studies show that this thing works. Yeah, in diet-induced catabolic geriatric patients. And now they sell it to a 17-year-old athlete to build muscle. And that's the problem with studies show. And what you did with this, it's the mass public, the general population, the basic foundations and the rules, the things that we always are going back to, everything. Even my wife just got a bunch of blood work done. And at the end of the day, you got to clean some stuff up. So we got to work on stress. We got to work on sleep. We got to work on movement, cleaning some things up in the diet. And it all goes back to the basics, but nobody wants to hear about the basics. It's not sexy. It's not quick.
No, it's not. It's not. This isn't one of those New York Times, instant bestseller stuff. I mean, it's like a manual, it's like a textbook. And my wife hates it when I say that, but she's like, make it sound good, make it sound like really exciting. And I'm like, okay, well, definitive evidence-based nutrition manual type thing. You can build a nutrition certification off if you had to. I mean, the opening two chapters are just trying to build scientific literacy in the general public, trying to teach the general public, like, why is science even important? How do you make sense of all the conflicting research? Like, how do you know when somebody spouts out a headline from the news and it's some sort of claim that's really kind of way out there or against what you've been told? And how do you figure all of that out? And I dedicate 2 chapters to just exactly how to navigate the minefield of misinformation and conflicting information, and just these warring camps of, oh, keto's the best, or no, this other type of diet is the best, paleo's the best. And how do you make sense of all that? Nutrition is such a confusing realm when it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Has there been anything in the last 10 years where you've
question.
changed perspective? Like, has any new research, has anything come out and you're going, oh, you know what? I have changed my mind on this thing. This was something I was wrong about.
That's a great question, man. One of them is in the training realm. But
nice.
I do have a couple in the nutrition realm too. So
go to the training side. I would like to hear about that.
Yeah. In the training realm,
it's all about Aram. It's all about Aram.
Yeah, it's all about.
This is your show, man. This is.
I just want to get more jackeder and more leaner. So just tell me what I need to do.
All right. Well, that's not going to be much. You don't have much more margin for that, but we can always go for it, right?
not unless I'm on super physiological doses of whatever I'm already on.
That's true. That's true. Just up the dose a little bit.
Perfect. More is better.
That's what people will remember from the podcast. They'll just take that clip, blast it out there.
More drugs, more exercise, less food. Perfect recipe for fitness.
That's what we're all about.
Yeah.
That's right.
So yeah, in the training realm, we were taught since basically the 1980s that the hypertrophy repetition range is 6 to 12. And anytime you dip below 6, you're just basically training for mass. And anytime you kind of go above 12 and into the teens, then you're just building strength endurance, right? And so a bunch of interesting research has rolled out within the past decade that showed that you can create similar hypertrophy with very low reps, very high reps, and moderate reps. It's just that with the very high reps, when you have to use very low loads, you really do have to focus on pushing those sets to actual failure instead of just, oh, this burns, I'm getting psychologically disturbed by how much discomfort I'm feeling, type of thing. And also the workouts last twice as long. So there's practical limitations to the very high rep side when you're trying to match the hypertrophic effects of that middle range, that 6 to 12 range. And on the lower end, there's practical limitations too, because typically the people who are 3 to 6ing it chronically and really don't dip into higher rep ranges, they're complaining about achy joints. And there's higher rates of injury happening there too, when you're trying to push hypertrophy with like a 3 to 6 range all the time. So that was an interesting revelation. So I didn't necessarily feel guilty about taking reps to like 15 or rather taking sets to 15 to 20 reps. I didn't feel like, oh gosh, this is just sort of an endurance exercise. I'm just might as well be doing cardio right now, type of thing. You actually say to yourself, oh, well, that's kind of cool. These, in quotes, these burnout sets can contribute to hypertrophy as well. And if you're not feeling so good, or if you're just training a muscle group that's prone to injury when you take it heavy, oh, well, you can just lighten the load and just take that to failure. And if you fail out at 15 to 20 reps, you're still going to get similar gains as if you were to do that classic 6 to 12er. So that was.
If you
He'll
can
pop-
hear us, you're freezing.
He'll pop
Something
back
that we all kind of.
You're freezing.
Oh, okay. Am I back? Am I back?
It
I'll eventually
seems
get
like
back.
you're
Can you hear
back.
me now?
There you go. Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Okay, cool.
So I know you just recently did something with Menno Henselman, right? You guys were you guys
Mhm.
did a seminar or something together in Europe.
Yeah, we did. We did.
No,
It was in the Republic of Cyprus.
oh, nice.
And that is like in the middle, is somewhere between the Middle East and I don't know, the Mediterranean-ish area.
which is where the best food is. But he was recently talking about, which is something that the bro scientists found out about 25 years ago, which was the whole length and partials thing.
Yeah,
right. So basically taking reps and not finishing a complete range of motion. So for people that don't understand what the concept of length and partial is, it's basically just taking the stretching portion of the exercise and living in that stretched portion position for some uncomfortable amount of time to be able to mediate a greater growth response. I mean, we've been seeing this. I remember being 15 years old and people were like, well, burn out with the hardest part of the set. That's what we were being taught. We didn't know how to explain it, but we knew what it was and we knew how to implement it.
Yeah.
And I always find it fascinating that bro science, for as much as it gets shit on, is always about 10 to 15 years ahead of what we end up finding out in actual research.
Yeah, it is. And sometimes the research misrepresents reality too. Like there's this ongoing thing about training to failure or not training to failure. How many reps in reserve do we have to keep in order to properly manage the stimulus to fatigue ratio and all that? And we're increasingly beginning to realize that it's just, look, take the freaking sets to concentric failure where it's safe to do so.
Yep.
And we have a strong enough self-preservation system where we're going to have a tendency to leave 1 rep in reserve anyway, 1 to 2 reps in reserve anyway, even if we think, failure, it just doesn't necessarily work like that. Yeah. So sometimes it's a lot more practical to just take the freaking set to, good form concentric failure where it's safe to do so. And so
even that just sticking with mechanical failure could be a way that some people who are trying to figure this out, like you're not breaking form. Mm-hmm. If you have to break form to do the next rep,
mm-hmm.
you're good. You hit failure. Right?
Yeah. Right. Right.
To
Totally.
To the lay person. All right.
And so
that's right.
And I think this is a field that gets so highly debated because I think there's a lot of people who are just really digging into the weeds on this stuff to find what the best thing is. And I'm sure this is something you're hearing and arguing about constantly, which is everybody that comes to us for a solution to their problem, whether it's they're too fat and they're under muscled, they don't like the way they feel, they don't like the way they look. It's always the first question is, what's the best way? What's the best way for me to do this? And then they start
pointing, that gets you to start today,
pointing at certain body parts.
Going,
and it's like, I wish I had the best way. I really do. I wish it was as easy as I can look at you and say, well, the best way for you, madam, is do this, this, and this, and that's going to get you exactly where you want to go. But unfortunately, can you explain? I want people to really just like bring this point home, and I want you to do it. Why is there no one best way?
Gosh, what? Everybody is. I mean, humans, obviously, we have similar basic physiology, but for something like diets, everybody, number one, I mean, there's a spectrum of different goals. Some people some people actually have the primary goal. I want to get as much muscular size on me as quickly as possible. And there's just a distinctly different set of rules for that goal than there is for, I have a decent amount of muscle, just kind of want to keep it, but I want to lose fat. That's my main goal. I just want to lose fat. So that's the first thing. There's different goals.
Yep.
And the second thing is people, individuals have different preferences. And so, like, for example, in the nutrition realm, all three of us probably have a very different set of our 20 favorite foods.
Sure.
Okay. Different set. It's impossible to just find everybody the same 20 favorite foods. In order for programs to be sustainable, you can't be suffering through the program. You can't hate the program. You can't hate the list of foods. You can't be dreading each meal. You might be able to do that for a 12-week period.
Sure.
You might be able to just grit something out that you really freaking hate. The training program, the nutrition program, like actors do that all the time.
Sure.
Like
yeah.
I remember Keanu Reeves talking about how he prepared for that movie back in the 90s called Speed. And it was the only time he was ever in good physical shape for a role. And he said he despised every minute of the program, the training, the having to eat a certain way. And he just vowed to just never do that again. I'm never going to do it.
Well, that was Gerard Butler for 300. That guy was a pack a day smoker and like a half a bottle of whiskey a day drinker. And he got into ridiculous shape. And then after the movie, he's like, I'm never fucking doing that again. That was awful.
Oh man. I love that movie so much. I own that movie. I've seen it like 7 times. People think I'm a cheese ball for loving that movie, but I just love it. I can't even get over how much I love that movie. So
awesome. So is Speed, by the way. Speed is still one of my top 10 favorite movies.
Oh yeah, it's great.
So
it's great. Such a classic. So yeah, programs have to be sustainable, and so if you think you can shoehorn everybody into the same 6 foods within a diet, they're just not going to be able to sustain it for the long term. And everybody has sort of unique individual responses to foods, to macronutrition distributions and everything like that. And people have different tolerances for that stuff too. There's a range of, even clinical conditions kind of creep into the picture as people.
Can you talk about some of those variables for a second? So you said the way that people tolerate foods. Can you just explain some of those variables? Like what would make like your what is it, digestion? Is it body fat percentage? Like what are some of these variables that are underlying that will determine how somebody deals with more carbs versus less fats, or more fats, less carbs?
Yeah. So on the tolerance side of things, so I'll cover like the tolerance side and then the performance side. So tolerance side of things, if you're looking at somebody who is trying to manage type 2 diabetes, or somebody who has pre-diabetes, or somebody who has pre-diabetes, they're insulin resistant, and they're exhibiting other symptoms of that progression, then number one, you're probably not going to throw them on something very high carb and then low fat, and it's just doesn't reflect what the evidence shows best alleviates that condition. Now, proportionally, something can be high carb and still alleviate insulin resistance, but you would have to place a person on a purposely hypocaloric diet where you're stripping off body weight and body fat, and then you can alleviate insulin resistance on a high carb, low fat diet. But if somebody has type 2 diabetes and they're trying to manage it, then there's a convergence of evidence showing that carb restriction, total carb restriction in the course of a day, it can contribute to better outcomes for type 2 diabetics. And it's somewhat elementary. They do have compromised metabolism in that area of physiology, so it doesn't necessarily make sense to carb the crap out of a type 2 diabetic. The amount of carbs or the degree of carb restriction that's appropriate for type 2 diabetics is somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 130 grams of carbs. And so we're talking about the majority of the general population with type 2 diabetes is better off having that restricted range, 50 to about 130-ish, rather than pulling in 200 to 400 grams of carbs a day like bros do, like you guys do, you know? And so that's where some of the individual tolerance stuff would come into play.
How does,
as far
so
as
for somebody who's listening to this, obviously they're probably not doing continuous glucose monitoring. They're probably not taking a finger prick in the morning. What are some telltale signs for somebody to determine whether or not they're insulin resistant? I mean, obviously if they go to the doctor, they'll determine that they're type 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
But just for the person who's listening, like, I suspect I might be that person who's sensitive to carbs. They've heard all the stuff that tells them that's going to make them fat. I mean, you and I probably know that, like, listen, if you're somebody who's 40% body fat, 35 as a man, 30 as, you're probably in that insulin resistant range.
Yeah.
But are there ways to spot it for the average person to be like, cool, this is me?
You know, unfortunately not. I mean, people do report just anecdotally. People have subjective feelings of feeling very lethargic and tired and groggy if they have a meal that's predominantly carbohydrate. So you can kind of listen to that anecdote and take it seriously and see where the results might lead if you build around people's subjective feelings. But aside from that, you just can't tell, other than people's just reaction to a meal, how they're feeling, whether they want to go to sleep or whether they can train, or whether they, you know, just what it does to their mood.
And is that because of the insulin spike that occurs for that individual acutely?
It's not necessarily the insulin spike. Although some would argue that, well, if somebody's insulin resistant, then they oversecrete insulin to get the fuel driven into the target tissues. And then that can be followed by like a mild level of hypoglycemia. And that's what could be causing sort of that crashing type of effect. But I don't know how reliable that is, you know, relying on people's subjective feedback. I think that we can, what you said was pretty dang solid. If somebody is sedentary and obese, then they almost always will have a degree of insulin resistance. And so with those individuals, the solution is to get them on hypocaloric conditions. And that is probably not going to leave a lot of room to getting in a whole lot of carbohydrate anyway. When you structure the diet to have sufficient protein and sufficient fat, there's just not going to be a lot of room for a lot of carbs anyway.
That's the biggest problem is we have 3 levers to pull. We have protein, we have carbs, we have fat. That's what makes up calories. So if we start pulling, we're not going to pull from protein, I think, almost ever, unless somebody has some severe digestive issues that we're concerned about. But clearly we're going to always try to keep that number as high as possible. So I think for anybody, like if you're listening, like the number one source of food that you should be consuming on a plate should always be protein dense, because that's the thing that you're always going to have almost no negative side effects from whatsoever. I mean, I think there's was cited research on, even if you overconsume on calories and those calories are coming predominantly from protein, pretty benign effect.
Yeah, protein is the least offensive macronutrient.
Offensive.
Protein is the macronutrient that is sort of the least negotiable anyway, in terms of whether you should have a little protein or a lot. It's like, just optimize the protein amount and train the client or the subject, or train yourself to be able to consistently hit a given optimized protein target. And the downsides of consuming high protein are pretty far-fetched. There is a small subset of the population who has chronic kidney disease. And for those individuals, well, okay, you can build a case for cutting off protein intake at, about 1.2 grams per kilogram at most. You know, you don't necessarily want to go beyond that.
I told a student, I teach high school, and I have a nutrition course that I wrote and teach, and a kinesiology course. And in the class, I'm telling them, average thing. Somebody might be, whether they're gaining or wanting to lose fat or gain muscle, whatever, you can potentially shoot for 1 gram per pound of body weight, outside of all the other variables that we would be talking about that we don't need to waste our time with. She tells her teacher that I said this in class, her science teacher, who obviously is smarter than a phys ed teacher with a master's in nutrition.
Obviously smart.
And the science teacher goes, that's a ridiculous amount of protein that will cause proteinuria. And then she comes and tells me this, and I go, eating protein will not cause it. If you have proteinuria, then you may have to watch how much protein. But this is like stuff that people, like, they're afraid of protein. They're afraid of carbs. They're afraid of now vegetables, potentially, if they're watching too many people online. It's out of control. I feel like as we're getting more and more people in the nutrition and fitness space who know their shit, everybody else, all these people just keep popping up. Like back in the day, it was just you had a VHS tape or you had this or that. Now with Instagram, is there any ending it? Like, what else could somebody come up with? What can people like
water is next.
Is it just like giving up? Well, I mean, how long is it going to take for eggs to be bad for you again? And then another 15, 20 years, they'll be good for you again.
They already are. It's cyclical.
But it's like we get frustrated. We talk about like the frustrations in it, but it's never going anywhere. We just have to keep, it's just drilling the basics to people and not fear mongering. But you being so elevated in the space, do you get frustrated? Or are you just kind of at the point where you're just shaking your head like, whatever?
I just know, my man. I just know that there's going to be another generation of fans of nutrition coming up, eager to learn, and they've been fed a bunch of bull crap. By the time they reach my page, for example, I just know that some of them are going to be open-minded, some of them are not, and I'm here for the open-minded folks, because a lot of the people that follow me, they end up following me because they have just been fed a whole bunch of crap. And then, when they finally hear that, okay, the only reason I believe what I believe in the nutrition realm is if it's got a solid scientific basis. And if something doesn't have a solid scientific basis, then all you got to do is say, hey, look, in my observations, this is what I've seen with this protocol.
Yep.
And there's no research on it, but in my observations, this is what happened. And that's all you got to do. It's the problems really just start coming up when people say, this is how it is. This is how agent X causes effect Y. And it's like that with everybody. And it's just insane when you say, okay, great. So what's the evidence for that? Can you link some sort of evidence? Is this something that you've observed in your practice? Or is there some sort of scientific basis for that? And a lot of the time, people they almost get offended at that question. They're like, what? It's like they don't even respect the importance of a scientific basis. You know what I mean? They think that it's just a game of throwing around claims. And if you're kind of the man, you got a big audience, then, hey, this is how it is because I said it. And it's pretty ridiculous, man. People need to be taught how to respect the concept of evidence. Otherwise, we might as well go back to the Stone Age and might as well just do trying to cast spells on people and pull out the voodoo dolls and just stick pins in whoever you want to, prevent from climbing up the work ladder. You know what I mean?
Well, that's why I love it when you said a while ago, I forgot, I think it was either Danny Matranga's podcast or somebody else, but you said that the burden of proof is always on the person who makes the claim.
Yeah.
So if some person says that fasting is the best way to lose fat, or fasting is going to do this, or keto is going to do that, great. I want to see you not only tell me that, but I want to see the case by case evidence, because I do believe in anecdotal evidence. I think anecdotal evidence has its place in our field of work. I mean, I've done stuff that's unconventional with plenty of people and it paid off, but I'm not going to go out there and make a claim and say that this is going to be what works for everybody.
Yeah.
Because I had to figure out.
But that's the problem too, is that even in research, there is no claim that this will work for everybody.
No,
So
That's
even
never.
in the midst of
That's right.
making these things, like where's the research on it? It's cool to have some research on it, but again, research can show anything, and it also shows there's outliers, and it also could just be it could be 65-70% was effective, and hey, that's pretty good research, but
Yeah.
that's still a decent portion of the community that it doesn't affect, or it's not gonna
true.
help in that way. So that's where I get
Yeah.
so frustrated on both sides. I get so frustrated on the people who are constantly preaching research, completely ignoring the anecdotal data, and I get frustrated with the people who don't know any research and they're just basing it on, well, this is my experience. They both have a role. They both apply.
Well,
It's
what's really
it's
interesting,
insane.
Jim, it's like what you bring up the frustration about like people who just won't be open-minded to something if it hasn't been shown in a peer-reviewed study, that is frustrating too. And I think we're at that point with protein, and we're at that point with protein recommendations where we have this sort of imaginary wall at 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight for muscle gain, where there's essentially no research showing that a dose greater than 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight further increases muscle mass. And just because we don't have that data, and the reason we don't have that data is because none of the research uses 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight as the lower protein comparator group. It always uses like 1.2 or the RDA, or, and there's, I think, exactly 2 studies where 1.6 is the lower protein comparator, but one of them didn't have a formal resistance training program. And, there was no difference between like 1.6 and maybe like, I believe it was 2.4. And then the most recent one that showed no significant difference in muscle gain between 1.6 versus double that versus 3.2 was in mildly trained subjects, men, with an average body fat percent of 21. Okay.
So relatively lean.
So relatively lean, but you're talking about highly trained folks who may be half that body fat percent, say 9 to 12-ish. I mean, we're talking about guys who are really trying to push the envelope and a lot of training experience.
Yeah, moderately trained, they're not pushing to failure. They don't have intensity or volume where those numbers could potentially be shown to be beneficial.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have a good handful of studies showing that amounts way higher than 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight show beneficial effects on body composition and strength. But we just don't have that 1.6 as the lower protein group comparator, except for the 2 studies I mentioned. And there's only one in existence that includes a resistance training program, and it happens to be on moderately trained subjects who are not particularly lean and not particularly not highly trained, not athletic, certainly not athletic subjects. And so what we see in the field is the guys who are just like jacked, like freaking animals, like Aram, basically. They habitually consume right around a gram per pound. Almost all of them do. And it's almost like a thing where you go, when there's enough of a consistency of what you're seeing the successful people do in a given area, you almost have to, take not a leap of faith, but kind of like trust in what you're observing and saying, you know what, maybe we can go higher than 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight and go the full 2.2 grams per kilogram of body, the full gram per pound. And by the way, what's really kind of hilarious is national level bodybuilders and professional bodybuilders, they're taking in easily over a gram per pound, and the guys at the the really high levels, they're just like taking down a gram and a half per pound, like as just a matter of standard minimal protocol.
Yeah.
And so there's something to be said really about observing what the guys succeeding in the field are doing. It's no guarantee that it's going to be a causal relationship and that it's correct. Maybe they're succeeding in spite of that. But the fact of the matter is the consistency of that is just so ironclad. Yeah. And there's still gaps in the knowledge of what we think we know about protein requirements for maximizing muscle mass. There's still gaps there. We still haven't quite looked at the populations that I would like to see looked at. We still haven't looked at the protocols that I would like to see looked at. And it may never get done, but I'm not going to wait around for it and figure, hey, I'm doing good because I'm doing just as good as the 21% body fat guys in the studies who did 9 sets per muscle group per week and didn't have any difference in muscle gain between 1.6 and 3.2. So it all kind of depends. Yeah. Depends on how, what you want to do in terms of the chances you want to take. And there's really no downside to consuming higher protein. That's the thing. And so why would you leave that potential on the table?
Because your science teacher told you not to eat that much.
Because some doctor told you that you were going to get fucking gout because of it or whatever else.
You don't need that much. And that's what you just said was exactly my post today about, I said, don't shit on the advice. I'll take forever trying to think of it in my head. Don't shit on the advice you asked for from people you admired enough to ask in the first place because you don't believe in yourself. And then question, how can I lose weight? How can I gain weight? How can I become better at whatever? And then that person gives you the response. And then their response is easy for you to say, I'm not going to do all that. So you have somebody that might ask somebody like Aram, like, oh, so what can I do to, lose some body fat? Well, try to eat like a gram of, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to eat that, and then walk away. But that is exactly how you just described what so many people do. You see see those people that are successful.
This is another interesting finding, Jim and Aram. One of my friends, Joey Antonio, he's the founder, one of the co-founders of the ISSN.
Yeah.
And he and his colleagues, they took a group of athletic subjects who were consuming about a gram per pound in terms of protein intake, just habitually consuming about a gram per pound. And they raised them up to, they raised it up by like about 50 grams of protein, I want to say. 50 to 75 grams of protein. Well, let me think. Actually, more a little closer to 70, 80 grams of protein a day, above and beyond their habitual intakes at a gram per pound. And what happened, recomp. So the subjects actually lost body fat and gained lean mass. The body fat losses reached statistical significance, but the lean mass gains occurred, but they weren't considered statistically significant. So
what were the circumstances? What under what conditions did that occur?
Resistance training, progressive resistance training, and free living conditions.
Okay.
Did they look
athletic subjects?
Did they look at total calorie intake? Because my first thought is, hey, we bump up the protein by that much, their hunger is going to be down. Maybe they're taking in less calories. Was that part of any of what they were looking at?
They looked at all that. And the odd thing is the protein intake represented a net increase in caloric intake. But what obviously must have happened was the subjects must have taken that protein energy and put that into their training. Put it to use. Yeah.
You have that thermic effect, but that's not.
Yeah, that would have been.
It's whatever, it wouldn't be that much.
Right. And so in free living subjects, athletic subjects who are doing resistance training, just stacking a significant amount of protein on top of their habitual intakes, it literally just made them lose fat and gain a little bit of lean mass. And there's 4 other studies where Joey Antonio and his group did this basically the same thing, is that they added like 50 to 100 grams of protein to people's existing habitual intakes once again, trained subjects on resistance training, and nothing happens. The protein just kind of disappears into thin air. But what must happen is that the intake of the other macros either goes down, or they either take that incoming energy and transfer it into putting that power to the ground in the gym and in their athletics and stuff. And so it is totally interesting. The whole area of extra or very high protein intakes, all it has shown thus far in free living conditions has been either no significant effect on body composition or actual fat loss. So that kind of goes back to the point that one of you made this point, that protein is, I guess, the most body comp friendly macronutrient that we should, strive to optimize.
Even just our immune system and all that kind of stuff. I get
Mhm.
into I start asking the questions. I feel like this is something that maybe the general population needs to be educated on, is asking questions.
Yeah.
Like, not like asking follow-up questions. Like when you said they increased their protein and lost body fat, common sense to me is, did it create increased satiety? They took in less calories.
Yep.
The average person might not, and they're like, oh, that's all I'm going to do. They're just not asking the right questions. So maybe Alan, you need to start a ask the right question series on Instagram.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm honestly, I'm glad you brought that aspect of it up, because I talked to Joey about that study. Like, there's one particular study that's super interesting. They actually doubled the subject's protein intake from 2.2 grams per kilogram all the way to 4.4 grams per kilogram. And so
wow,
they're consuming
that much. Are they just like
2 grams per pound, right?
Chicken in a protein shake and drinking it. Are they just drinking Isopure all day in their water?
They're stacking protein powder on top of their existing intake, and I'm sure they're enjoying like a couple extra steaks or chicken thighs or something like that.
Yeah, that's wild.
Or chicken breasts, maybe. Okay, so yeah,
do they test the smell? Do they test the smell of their bedrooms and offices with what is coming out of their orifices?
I don't think they would have had the personnel and the resources and the intestinal fortitude to carry that part through. But that would have been a fun experiment too. Like, how did your general quality of life go?
But that's the thing is when you're highly satisfied. And honestly, like, I think there's always this weird misconception that like fat is filling. And by the way, fat in no way, shape, or form is filling whatsoever. It's usually going to be carbs that are high volume foods, and then protein, high volume food. So just give somebody as much high volume, real, identifiable in nature food, and you really can't fuck this up. The problem is, and this is where we're never going to get any research done on any of it, is the psychological aspect of how people eat and why they eat the way they eat. And that's the stuff that we'll never really be able to uncover, because at the end of the day, we know most people that are following your account, my account, Jimmy's account, anybody that we're connected to has heard the protein spiel before. They understand the importance of progressive overload strength training. They know that carbs are not the enemy, but they're still not quite convinced of that, because when they eat them, they still see the scale go up, and that's their only measure of progress.
Right.
What we need to start really emphasizing in our space is, what is your relationship to food and with food? And why is it that your expectations based on the current lifestyle that you have so fucking unreasonable? Because that's really what it comes down to.
Aram, I had a really interesting conversation with just sort of a random dude. I think I do remember his username. Supermanscape, like 007, something like that. But anyways, I was tagged in somebody's post, and because so they were talking about fasted cardio versus fed cardio, and the post was
the other debate.
This is a good one. And so the post was outlining, like, mentioned the study that I did with Schoenfeld et al., where we compared a fasted cardio group with a fed cardio group, and we took the experiment for a whole 4 weeks, and I say a whole 4 weeks, because that's
Yeah,
what people
so-
always, they freaking finger wag
Yeah.
our shit. Yeah, it was only 4 weeks, man.
Yeah.
Well, we should have at least seen something within 4 weeks, right? If there was some magic with fasted cardio, but we didn't. And and so somebody came in and said, you know, I don't I don't think that's true, because if they're not talking about insulin, then I don't know if they really know what's going on with that. And so I was tagged in that comment section, and I tried to explain to this guy, I said, okay, so when you eat something before cardio, you're basically burning what you ate before cardio. So you're oxidizing less fat during the training session. Now, if you take two groups of people and you feed them the exact same diets, and you just basically scoot the breakfasts of these people, the fasted cardio group is going to burn or oxidize more fat during the cardio. And then the fed cardio group is going to oxidize more fat in the hours within the rest of the day, because there's simply less food to inhibit that fat oxidation. Whereas, it's just different in the other group. And so I tried to simplify it and say, it just comes out as a wash.
Yeah.
There's more fat burning after training in the fed group, and there's more fat burning during training in the fasted group. It just comes out the same by the end of the day. And then he's like, but insulin. I'm like, okay, let's talk about insulin for a second. Well, I'm gonna take you through a thought experiment here. Let's say we have two groups of people who are fed the same amount of calories, same amount of protein. One group is ketogenic, so like 10% tops of their calories are coming from carbohydrate. And the other group is high carb, low fat. Whatever proportions you want.
50% carb.
Yeah, let's say 50% carbs, man, And let's say we take that group and we run the experiment for however long you want, 8 weeks, 6 months, whatever. Who's going to lose more fat between those two groups? Same amount of protein, same amount of calories. Which do you think? Which group do you think? And right away, he's the keto group. And I'm like, okay, you're incorrect per about a dozen very well controlled studies. Just a numbing, repetitive replication of studies that match protein and calories and see no difference in fat loss between groups who are consuming the same amount of calories and protein, but with highly disparate amounts of carbohydrate and fat between the groups. There's no difference in fat loss. And then I said, is that uncomfortable to know? I mean, what do you think? Does the cognitive dissonance feel bad? I mean, you tell me, what do you think of that?
Whatever, dude, fuck you.
He got upset. He literally got upset. He deleted the entire conversation thread. He blocked me. And I was like, dude, tone really doesn't come through in text sometimes, dude, there's so many people out there in the general public who have been taught that it's about insulin. But I had to explain to this guy, look, if one diet has more carbohydrate than another diet, it's always going to be more insulinogenic. So why on earth do we have a dozen plus studies showing that higher carb, lower fat diets don't cause less body fat loss than ketogenic diets when you match protein and carbs, in spite of them being much more insulinogenic? Why is that? And the answer is, well, it's because insulin kind of is a bystander and not a driver or a regulator of fat mass. Insulin can be anywhere, high, low, mid, anything you want, but it's really the total calories and obviously, and the protein as well, that is going to influence the overall thermic balance of the diets anyway, and that goes back to calories. That's what will determine changes in body fat mass. And so I never got around to really trying to explain it to the guy, because he was just mad that I told him he was incorrect.
You're taking your time out of your day to try to talk to him, and then to just get angry and block. The blocking part is the most insane thing to me. You took time out of your day and you don't
Yeah.
have to. You're not somebody
Yeah.
with 300 followers trying to prove yourself. It's funny because with that ketogenic, versus non-ketogenic, it's so sexy. If you don't eat carbs and your body has to burn fat for fuel through ketosis, and I'm like, if you're in a calorie deficit, your body burns fat for fuel through lipolysis. It's just
Yeah.
one doesn't sound sexy, but the other one does. And that's
Yeah.
what's so
Yeah.
frustrating. Like you could try to educate people on that. They're like, it's still that same response. I don't know. I don't know about
Yeah.
that.
Right.
So I
Right.
guess all you can do is just keep having those conversations. Maybe next time, if there's something like that, send the guy a direct message and send him an audio message so that your tone can come across.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
Well,
I
and-
guess
and-
so, man.
but
I
you
guess
again,
also
so.
want to educate everybody on that feed as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everybody can see that. That's the hard part.
But again, it also comes
Yeah.
down to all the surrounding variables to the discussion that nobody wants to have, which is what are the conditions under which you're actually living your life?
Mhm.
Are you somebody who's
Mhm.
consistent in measuring any of these variables whatsoever? When you attempted a keto diet, were you actually blood levels of ketones in your body as opposed to doing the piss strip, which we know is relatively inaccurate? Are you somebody who's high body fat versus high muscle mass? Because I'll show you a mountain of anecdotal people that are walking around here in San Diego, and I'm sure where you are in California, walk into any gym, and you got plenty of people that are eating 500 grams of carbs and 50 grams of fat. They're lean as shit. They're muscular. They got boulder shoulders.
Yeah.
Girls
Yeah.
have big muscular butts and hamstrings, and they're on high carb diets, and they have no problem. But you put somebody who's 450 pounds with mostly body fat on them, and you feed them a high carb diet, and they're going to keep ballooning up because they don't have the environment to tolerate those carbs. So the conditions of these things matter. So if you're a 48-year-old woman and you're in the entry level of perimenopause, and your gut microbiome is starting to shift and your hormones are starting to change, maybe for that individual, we don't go 250 grams of carbs because they're probably not training that hard anyway to facilitate that level of energy needed. So maybe that person doesn't need high carbs. Maybe they need a bit of higher fat, higher protein, moderate, or maybe a little bit of a calorie deficit. But I think people are just ignoring the fact that most people, A, are not consistent enough to measure any of these things. And when they think they're being consistent, they're missing out on a ton of other, hidden calories, whether it's meals out, the unreported stuff that we know is constantly happening in our field, which is, I think I tracked, but I really didn't track. I'm a person who does this constantly. Like I'll have a perfect day, and then post dinner, it'll be snack time, and snack time doesn't count as calories. So we have no idea what happens there. And how many people are just misreporting stuff as human error.
Aram practices what we call intermittent tracking. It's similar to intermittent fasting. He only tracks in a 6-hour window. It's been highly ineffective. But do you? I wanted to see.
So that's all right. The guy's injured. We'll cut him some slack.
It's been going on long before.
It's like
we can talk later about it.
Even with that.
We got a little delay, I think. Go ahead.
So you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, the whole like stacking protein on top of your habitual intake thing, I've gotten a lot of questions from folks who said, hey, so you're telling me that if I add 800 calories of protein to my day, it's just going to disappear? And I said, maybe not you if you're tracking everything, you know what I mean? But if you just take a bunch of people and just tell them, hey, add 100 grams of protein to your diet, just continue your training as you would, then there will be a tendency for most, if not all of that caloric surplus to kind of get swallowed up by various pathways. But that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who tracks everything is going to experience the same thing, because in that research, there probably was a combination of over-reporting protein intake, right? Misreporting, because you don't want to shame yourself before the research personnel.
True.
And an unconscious or a subconscious drop in intake of the rest of the macros. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing would be an increase in energy expenditure, probably through the exercise pathway, or maybe the non-exercise pathway, or both. and maybe even some increased excretory energy, right? So all of those things could have happened during that experiment. And there have been tightly controlled, like freaking metabolic ward style protein escalation study. It was done by George Bray, and I think it was 2012. And they escalated protein intake from below the RDA all the way up to like something like a gram and a half per pound. And people progressively gained fat as they escalated the protein intake. But these people were not training, and they were basically locked under surveillance. And so it is possible to gain fat if you just stack protein on and really rigidly hold all the variables steady. It's just that in the real world, in free living conditions, in resistance trainees, some really interesting shit happens when you just stack protein on top of their habitual intake, as shown by 4 studies now by Joey and his colleagues.
I mean, it could be as simple as just like, hey, I mean, and here's the 2 things. The people that are following us are probably somewhat slightly in front of the basics. Like they've already kind of figured out the protein thing, like we talked about before. Like they already kind of already know the basics. What they're missing usually is a data set that they've experienced long enough to be able to observe changes in themselves. Because what happens? Usually they're going to be good for 4 or 5 days in a row. Then the weekend comes. Then there's guilt and shame over what happens over the weekend, which then equates to I just put on body fat. Whereas no, the 3 pounds that you saw go up on Monday was probably just water retention from some of the restaurant eating you did.
Yeah.
And then there's an immediate emotional response to alter something. Like this isn't working. I clearly got fat over the weekend. I have to now drop calories even further. I have to increase cardiovascular load higher. And then it's this complete constant cycle, which usually ends up resulting in a lower net muscle mass and a lower, maybe you're losing fat in the process, but you're also losing muscle mass every time. And then when you regain the weight, because you go back to normal conditions or whatever conditions, you're net gaining fat and still net under muscle.
Yeah.
So that's the observation I've seen consistently when somebody comes to me after multiple dieting attempts that were unregulated or unmeasured. You have this under muscled, over fat physique, which is just getting exacerbated through each attempt. And there's never the addressing of like, okay, I'm going to just spend this year focusing on not but losing body fat at all and just hammering muscle gain. Yeah. And I think that person would have a much greater outcome at the end of that 365-day period versus the person who tried to keep going through multiple dieting cycles and not addressing muscle gain.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you, what is your biggest, because as we're talking about all this stuff, what's your biggest fear in the future of our health here in America, specifically in the direction that maybe food is going or environment or whatever it might be? What is something, have you ever thought about that? Like, what's your biggest fear coming up? You've been around the block a little bit. You've seen some changes.
Yeah, man. Yeah. That's a really good question. Okay, so the the first thing that comes to mind is the rise of obesity and diabetes. Okay, and this rise has continued to occur in spite of the wild success of the anti-carb and the low-carb, high-fat, ketogenic diet push in the media, from best-selling books to this guru or that guru. And this rise has also happened in diabetes, particularly, despite the popularity of the intermittent fasting push that essentially happened now going on 14, 15 years ago. So these kinds of trends towards the extreme, they just don't freaking work in the long term. That's the problem. They work in these 6 to 12 week spurts, and they work amazing. But then the boomerang back is just brutal. People end up worse than they were before because the magic bullet didn't work. And so I think that I guess to answer your question more directly, My biggest fear is people's natural tendency, the general public's natural tendency to get turned off by the concept of a gray scale, and for them to seek out the black and white extremes, for them to seek out the single scapegoat food that they need to avoid for their lives to become better. I'm going to avoid carbohydrates. Or I'm going to avoid seed oils. That one's particularly stupid.
Good. By the way, good luck trying to avoid a seed oil.
I know, right?
But even with that kind of stuff, I'm going, it's not the seed oil, it's the cakes and the pastries. You're sucking down cakes and pastries. Yeah. It's not the seed oil. It's
like nobody's drinking canola oil out of the fucking bottle. I don't know anybody that walks around and is like, ooh, let me douse a little bit of this grilled chicken in some Mazola canola oil. Like nobody's doing that.
Listen, nobody's going to interrupt you.
No, it's all good. It's like, I know so many people who like, and you guys can do this at conferences and whatnot. It might not be the most representative sample, but I've done this at several conferences where I ask the audience to just be honest and say, hey, who has tried ketogenic diet, like bona fide ketogenic diet, 50 grams or less per day? And a majority of the audience will raise their hand. And then I say, okay, now be honest, who's still on it? And then 90%, 95% of the hands go down, like 2 or 3 hands will be up in the room. And it's like, okay, there's a reason for that. People just generally cannot sustain extremes. And there's going to be a vocal minority of people, typically on Twitter, who will tell you that they've been on keto for the last 5 years and they're doing great. Bullshit. And that's fine. I have nothing against that. But until the general public learns that in order to sustain a plan, they have to be doing what they personally enjoy and prefer. Some people can do carnivore for their whole lives, and hey, great, more power to you, dude. But the problems come in when these people preach that, hey, this is how everybody needs to do it. I personally consume a relatively low carb diet, but I don't preach that everybody needs to do that, because I know the evidence base, and I know all lines of evidence, and I know what the healthiest people on the planet, I know how they eat. It's good to keep that in mind, that model, to try to kind of draw from it and incorporate some of those habits from the people with the lowest amounts of chronic disease and the best longevity and all of that stuff. I try to take that and just freaking add some protein and resistance training to it, right?
I mean, I wish that message was so easy to receive. But I think, again, the emotional component of this entire situation is such a thing it's such a powerful thing that people overlook. It's that, and I work with mostly women, so the emotional component's usually even a little bit higher. Not that men aren't reactive to body weight. I mean, we just spent 3 days with some of the most jacked people in the world, and these guys are freaking out.
Yeah, it's an image issue more with women when they're younger. And I think a lot of our food issues go back to when we're younger. Okay, you've had enough, dear. You've had enough. And now it's like, well, no one's going to tell me that. There's so much of those things that are going on. It's the environment now that's so different. And should we have health lobbyists that are fighting for, like, why the fuck are there snacks at Old Navy checkout? Like, why do I go to Staples and there's all these snacks? Yeah. Like, why
the hardware
these
store
places? I mean, you're constantly being visually stimulated to eat highly caloric foods that do not satiate you at all. That's the biggest thing that I've seen over the last handful of years, where I'm like, you can't get away from it. It really, it was Old Navy that blew me away. I brought my son there, and I'm going through a snack aisle to go up to the register. Yeah. I'm like, how the hell's anybody?
That's insane.
How the hell's
Wow.
And then, of course,
that's every store now.
That's for something every single time, and it's everywhere. Like, at what point that becomes then a political conversation of, like, why are we allowing things that other countries don't? Like Mexico, I believe they're not allowed to put cartoon characters on the cereal boxes. They can't be advertising the kids, but that's exclusively what we do. It's insane. the cigarette ads that used to be below the counter at places, then the laws changed that you can't have them in eyesight of the kids. They're above the counter. But then they're just replacing this stuff with the junk. I mean, I don't think there's ever going to be enough education or enough people out there to counteract the way that the country's going in terms of just the availability of everything.
Yeah.
Everywhere, nonstop.
I think that in the entertainment media, the younger generation gets heavily influenced by the glorification of substance abuse. Everything from alcohol to cannabis and everything in between, just general like smoking, tobacco. I'm not a Puritan myself, but when you talk about what makes me concerned as far as the trajectory of the general population, I don't know if you guys ever had the munchies before.
Oh yeah,
cannabis.
We've had some conversations on here.
But just because it's legalized now, that doesn't mean that the munchies went away,
No.
And so there's a compound problem with those types of things if the younger generation doesn't really put a certain degree of restraint on how they engage, And the latest post I did on Instagram really kind of lit things up. Like I posted about how it's a really kind of a funny post. And I laughed while I posted it because it was a systematic review that reported that smoking marijuana is bad for your lungs. Okay. And people are like, no shit, Sherlock. And I'm like, yeah, I know. It's low hanging fruit, but some people need to hear this. And
yeah.
But as it relates to nutrition, the munchies, like pot induced munchies, you will plow, my friends. You will plow through an entire pantry of just random stuff. And it's
even though there's no saliva left in your mouth, you will continue. No. Like
you'll just like chomp on the wood, on the side of the pan, just chomp on it. It's not good.
I used to eat tomato sauce out of the jar with a spoon and salsa out of the jar with a spoon. I would spray. I would dump and squirt mustard on top of romaine lettuce. I would do whatever the fuck it could just to satiate that desire. But people I think people don't really understand how powerful hunger and cravings can be when those things aren't managed and those things aren't understood, and the mental aspects of behind why this stuff is happening. And then there's also that loss of self-responsibility of, oh, well, I did this thing and I forgot about it, because most people are not living in 3,000 calorie conditions where they have that flexibility to go and have those overages. Most people are probably doing what most people do, which is they eat twice a day, if that. Mm-hmm. And then there's this massive level of overconsumption after that second or whatever meal at night. And then it's like, well, I don't understand how I'm gaining weight. I only ate twice a day. It's like, well, you only ate twice a day, but what you ate amounted to about 3,000 calories if you actually did the math on it.
I think I'm going to coin the term intermittent tracking or intermittent awareness.
Yeah,
that's what everybody has. Intermittent awareness. They remember all the good stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Intermittent compliance. You guys, there was a 75 hard conversation that I had on Instagram like not too long ago, and it brings up some interesting points. It's like, okay, when you get people to put alcohol completely aside, then they're not getting the calories from the alcohol. They're not getting the screw it attitude after the 2 a.m. hot wings effect, and the combination of those things. They're not getting the hangover that's messing up their training the next day or preventing them from going to the gym the next day.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that on the topic of substances, I think alcohol is an underrated saboteur for the general population. And I'm not one of these guys who's like.
I was going to ask you that because you had a transformation. So continue with what you're saying, but you stopped drinking, correct? Or did you go through a period of time where you did? Yeah. How long ago is that?
That was a little over 5 years ago.
Wow. So understand when he's talking about this, he has personal experience on both sides of this. And it was a great transformation. I mean, the physical difference in you was dramatic. I remember when you posted that picture of like this was me before when I was drinking. And it's somebody who's always been in the health space and
Yeah,
knows your stuff.
absolutely, man.
So yeah, so
Absolutely.
just wanted to remind everybody listening that you've been through this. So go ahead.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And I'm not somebody who would advocate for, the abstinence from alcohol for everybody. But if people are harsh, if you're genuinely struggling with losing body fat, improving body composition, it's a factor that a lot of people overlook.
Yeah.
And usually it's middle-aged parents who are in that group who kind of depend on alcohol intake to kind of take the edge off of work life and kids and the stresses of family life and all that stuff. And so I think it's something that people may want to try. I brought up 75 hard because you cut out
No
too
drinking.
many things, including alcohol, and then you stupidly drink, like, what is it? Is it a gallon of water a day or something like that?
Yeah, gallon.
It's like, I mean, they get some good stuff and then they add some unnecessary stupid stuff in there too. But so I think that's an underrated weapon for people to investigate, to see what happens. If you regularly drink, and you're frustrated about how to change body composition, how to improve training, because when you stop drinking, your sleep improves, and when your sleep improves, your cravings go down generally. And your training gets better, and the combination of not having this appetite going on, plus the better training, it's kind of magical. And so yeah, I mean, that's definitely what happened with me.
Have you not touched it since? Or have
I
you
have
had
not touched it, Matt.
and right now you're in a place where it's like you just don't see yourself. No, obviously never say never, but you're loving
Yeah.
it so much and how you're feeling that you're like, I'm good. It doesn't even cross your mind anymore, kind of a thing.
That's correct. And
That's
I know
awesome.
everybody's story is different, but
Yeah.
I've got half drank bottles of wine up in the house. I've been sitting for months. My wife will occasionally, like once or twice a month, she'll have like a glass or two of wine. She's like one
Yeah.
of those normal people who could just occasionally drink, take it or leave it.
That's
She
not
doesn't get.
normal though. That's the problem. That's
Yeah.
not normal.
Yeah.
You
Right.
know,
Right.
the
Right.
amount of times that people are just like, I can't not do it. But then at the same time, will say that they don't have a problem, but
Yeah.
you can't
That's
go
right.
without it.
That's right.
Live life. It's like, but you're numbing yourself. And me and
Yep.
Aram have no
Yep.
problem with with alcohol and things like that. If you want to drink, they want to drink, but people really need to sit down and have that conversation with themselves. If you're saying that you
Yeah.
can't, and
Right.
you're enjoying life by having it,
Yeah.
doesn't
So
sound like it.
it was one of those things, dude. I mean, like maybe it was in my genetics, or maybe it's in Lord, I don't know. I don't know what God's plan was, man, but I've drank enough for like 5 men, 5 sailors in my life. And um it was just better for me to just stop. Liver was like tapping out, like,
Yeah.
like with Herb Dean, just not coming in soon enough.
Yeah.
And
That's UFC, buddy. UFC, buddy.
and
Let me
so yeah, I literally haven't had a single drink in over 5 years, and I don't recommend that universally. I mean, I think that there
Yeah.
are people who can cut back. They don't necessarily have to cut out, but they have to be very disciplined about the limits they set for themselves. Not everybody can. So
let me I know we're getting pretty
Yeah.
far into the weeds here, but I did want to ask one question before we signed off.
Yeah.
And this is a problem I think a lot of people are having. They're having pretty damn good weeks, again,
Mhm.
Monday through Thursday, whatever it is. Could you just brush over just the really highly impactful ways that eating out can be a deterrent for fat loss?
Yeah. On average, a meal that you would prepare at home, the equivalent of that meal out is roughly double the calories, double the total calories. So your typical 800-900 calorie meal at home, a nice hearty 800-900 calorie meal at home, that's going to be a good 16 to 1800 calories when you have it out. And when you have these meals out, you've got sides, you've got drinks, you've got desserts. At home, you're not necessarily going to have the side dishes. You're not necessarily going to have the drinks. You're not necessarily going to have the desserts. Nobody wants to do that kind of
You
cleaning
don't
and
at
preparation.
home. You don't have a giant bread bowl before every meal.
Yeah, you don't show up absolutely starving. They shove the warm bread and the butter in front of your face.
The amount of times I'm like, I'm not going to eat the bread, and then I eat the bread
Every
every
time.
time. Like I'm not
So,
eating the bread.
if you're at the Cheesecake Factory, it's it's inevitable.
I love that. I
But
love that black bread at the Cheesecake Factory. Oh my God, it's so good.
it's great, isn't it? Isn't it?
Ugh.
And another factor, when you're out, there's this social phenomenon that goes on with eating where you just tend to eat as long as there are people around. They've actually done experiments that are published in the peer-reviewed literature where they watch people in group environments while they're eating, and the people who are among a group for a longer period of time consistently eat more food than the people who are sitting by themselves. And it's almost that people tend to use food as almost like a social crutch, almost like a comfort blanket to while you're there, and kind of feeling that low level anxiety of the social environment.
It gives you
And so
something to do.
it
If you're
gives you some,
socially
yes.
awkward.
Well, it's like having a
Mhm.
drink while you're at a party. You just keep sipping on your drink because
You
you don't want
just
to
keep
talk to
sipping
anybody.
on it. It's almost like you whip out your phone, you look at it, but in this case, you're just kind of chomping on stuff. You're kind of, and so it's an interesting phenomenon that combined with the extra calories. And it's a crap load more calories. Sometimes people just can't recover from it. It 2 days, 2 nights of eating out blows their whole deficit for the week. Yeah,
That's
those are
huge.
just, those are the
That's
factors.
That's and for anybody that's listening that doesn't want to believe that, I want to challenge you to this. If you want to do any type of a challenge, whether it's 75 hard, whole 30, one of these challenges that exist just to put you into a place of structure, spend 30 days not going out to eat or ordering one meal out, and cook every single thing you put in your mouth at home without even trying to lose weight. I promise you probably will.
Does the DiGiorno's pizza count as cooking at home?
Sure.
It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno.
Sure. Fuck it. Have sure. Sure.
Well,
I bet that individual would still lose weight, even eating the DiGiorno's pizza and the ice cream. I bet they still would. I think
that would be a hell of a challenge. That would be a challenge. And
yeah,
mental toughness too. It would build mental toughness.
Well, I mean, Alan, I don't know about you, but like when I was growing up, I mean, I'm almost 40. I'm sure you're just maybe slightly older than I am, but like my parents weren't taking us out to eat. Like I didn't go out to eat 3 times a week when I was a kid. I didn't go out 3 times a week.
It had to be a special occasion.
Yeah.
It was different. It was like my mom with 3 kids, it was Monday through Friday. Like this is our Monday meal, our Tuesday meal, our Wednesday meal, quarterly liver, it wasn't the greatest stuff, like the highest quality foods, but it was just structured at home because it was easier. It's funny because people will be like, I feel like I'm grocery shopping all the time, but you don't say, I feel like I'm going out to eat all the time. Grocery shopping once a week is too much. Twice a week is too much, but you'll go out and spend an hour and a half, 3-4 times a week. No problem.
Yeah. The most challenging clients you guys have ever had, I've ever had, do not know how to cook at all. Like they don't know how to cook at all. And that adds this really thick layer of challenge to their progress.
What would you recommend to them? They're wanting to learn to cook home and keeping it simple. Are you like get that slow cooker recipe thing out? Yeah. Or what would be your simple tip to somebody who is listening, who's like, yeah, that's me. I hate cooking.
Just take things one dish at a time, get good, get comfortable with your favorite dish, and try to just knock out learning like literally like one new dish per week. Yeah.
What is your go-to seasoning? What's your go-to seasoning? What's your Frank's red hot sauce? I put that shit on everything for your meat or potatoes and things like that.
It's honestly, man, salt and pepper. That's my thing. Salt and pepper.
You're a purist, man. You don't drink anymore. You don't use condiments. You're a lot of fun at a party.
He doesn't even use condoms. That's the kind of guy he is. No condoms or condiments.
Oh man, we might need to cut this part out, but Yeah, no. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. Right?
Well, when we get done, you can tell us. That's
Oh
funny.
man, yeah.
Salt and pepper.
When we cut the tape, I'll tell you what I was going to say.
All right. Well, let's ask Alan one last question. So
Here it is.
you're about to become electrocuted because you're on death row for something awful like going back into drinking.
He
And
probably was promoting a calorie deficit for weight loss, so he had to
probably was
sentence him to death.
over consuming
Yeah.
seed oils and
Maybe
dairy.
maybe he spoke out against Bill Gates' fake meat. Go ahead.
So you have the opportunity to have one last meal, and during your last meal, you get to enjoy the album of your choice. What is your last meal, and what is that album that you're listening to?
Oh man, that's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, so the last meal would definitely be some surf and turf, man. Maybe definitely like a filet mignon with some lobster and some pasta as well. Um God, dude, I love every food there is on earth. Like I'm thinking, shit, should I get sushi too on the side?
That's what my first thought was. Like,
Yeah, do it.
you can get whatever you want.
Yeah,
What's
it's
your
your last
dessert
meal.
then? What would be your dessert go-to?
Yeah, the desserts I really like are chocolatey stuff. I love those molten lava cakes that take like 15 minutes to make, with the vanilla ice cream there, and then it's just that combo of that hot, that chocolate molten situation with the vanilla ice cream, it's a little bit of whipped cream that's real nice.
Mm,
And the music or the album.
the album, the Crow soundtrack.
Oh man, okay, so
That was actually a very good
God,
soundtrack.
It was.
this is a good freaking question, guys.
That means
Oh
it's
man,
impossible. It's a very difficult question.
it's impossible, but I have to admit the first band that came up was Journey. So then maybe
Oh,
the album Escape, you know. So
perfect. All right.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
listen, we'll take that. Alan, thank you for coming on, man. You're always a wealth of knowledge. I think if anybody doesn't have the flexible dieting book, they should buy it after this. And we don't have a coupon code for you, so put some money in his fucking pocket. And then hopefully we'll have you back at some point again to discuss the next findings as a follow-up to what was I already forgot about the first book that you wrote.
Girth Control.
Girth Control, right. It'll be Girth Control Part 3, and that will be coming out in 2027 after we've debunked everything there is to know about nutrition.
It may be coming sooner than that. I doubt it. I doubt it. They're writing flexible dining. That almost killed me, so it'll be a while. Another book. But yeah, you guys, thank you so much. I love the topics. You guys are great guys, and I really enjoyed that. And thank you everybody for tuning in.